How you doing there? Welcome back to Babble on Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Nun Hey, Daf 55 of Masechta Chullin. Friends, Daf 55 is pretty gewaldig. Daf 55 is pretty gewaldig. There's some cool stuff on Daf 55. The first section, well, first of all, we're going to be wrapping up the Mishnah that I think we began yesterday already. Yeah. We began a Mishnah yesterday in Daf Nun Daled. So in Daf Nun Hey, we are going to be getting all the way up to the next Mishnah where we're going to start talking about chickens, which is cool. We've been talking about animals up until now. So yeah, there's some pretty interesting stuff. The first topic we're going to discuss today is ad Bichlal and ad velo ad Bichlal. Very interesting discussion in my opinion. And then we are going to just have like a topic to topic kind of thing, wrapping up the Mishnah. So we're going to be jumping around from topic to topic. So we're going to be discussing when the spleen is missing. We're going to discuss when the kidneys are missing. We're going to discuss when, if an animal doesn't have a womb. We will discuss when the lungs are all shriveled up, and finally when the skin is missing. Remember that terrible condition. So basically, there's kind of a lot of topics on this daf. It should be pretty interesting. Kind of a range of the ad bichlal, ad bichlal, ad velo ad bichlal is kind of more of like a slower going exploration of that topic, which is cool. And then we kind of do a lot of jumping around from topic to topic. So I think it should be pretty interesting. So come join me, come along. Let's all enjoy ourselves and learn Daf 55 of Masechta Chullin. I've been mamish trying to get a haircut for the past 2 days. Pasha, it's just not happening, huh? I have like a little window right now. The last 2 days, I had like a window when I can get a haircut. Whatever, like the daf like hasn't been as hard, although this daf ended up taking longer than I thought it would. Also, my Tanya Chavus in the morning, he was away for 2 days. Like I had an opportunity. I was mamish trying to get a haircut. The guy was like sick. Now what? It takes months until finally I have like a opportunity to get a haircut, you know? Akoponim. Where are we? When Daf Nun Daled Omid Beis, like 8 or 10 lines from the bottom. But maybe now that I got like the ball rolling, maybe once I like broke the ice, to try to schedule the things. I don't know when my Chavrusa is back already tomorrow, my Tani Chavrusa. And I don't know, who knows what's going to be with the chickens. It might be difficult sugyas. Anyways, we'll have to see. Okay, we're going to start on Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis, about 10 lines from the bottom. Omer Rav Nachman. Oh, kidoki. Says Rav Nachman. Make sure my volume's off. Okay. Kisela ki yaser mi kisela ki isar ki yaser mi ka isar. Amuksav Rav Nachman ad velo ad bichlal. Okay. Okay. Our very, very interesting stuff. So our Mishnah had said that when there's a hole in the trachea, the animal is kosher. When there's a hole in the trachea, the animal is kosher, so long as the hole is not too big. Who remembers how big is too big? The size of an Italian isar, the size of a coin. So let's actually read what the Mishnah says. The Mishnah says, Ad kama techsar, how much can be missing in the trachea? Reb Shimon ben Gamliel Omer ad ki isar italki, until the size of a coin. Until the size of this isar, the animal is kosher. Once the hole in the trachea is the size of an isar, the animal is no longer kosher. It is now treif. The shaila is, do we say ad ve'ad bichlal? Do we say that up until and including the size of an isar is kosher? So when it's exactly the size of an isar, it is still kosher? Or do we say ad velo ad bichlal, which means that up to the size of an isar is kosher, but once it's the size of an isar, exactly the size of an isar, it's already treif. So Rav Nachman says it means up to the size, right? What do Rav Nachman say? Rav Nachman kisela ki yaser mi kisela, ki isar ki yaser mi kisar. We'll get to the sela in a second. But the isar, so ki isar is ki yaser mi ki isar. That once already you get to an Isar, it's the equivalent of it being larger than an Isar, i.e. an Isar itself already is too big, so it's Ad Isar, Velo Ad Bichlal, right? The Isar itself, that it's until, is not included, it's excluded. Once you get to the Isar, it's already treif. What's the scenario of the Sela? The scenario of the Sela gets back to a Mishnah from Oilais that we have already quoted a few times in recent weeks. That I believe it's Perek Beis Mishnah Gimel, I think, in Masechta Oilais. Unless it's Perek Gimel Mishnah Beis. So maybe, does it say? Do we have it quoted over here? I don't know. It's somewhere. It's in Masechta Oilais. I don't see it. I think it's Perek Beis Mishnah Gimel, Perek Gimel Mishnah Beis, one of those two. So, of course, we were talking about Tumas Oil. If there's a corpse in, let's just say, a tent, so everything in the tent becomes tummy with Tumas Oil. Now, what if the corpse isn't in the tent, but just the skull is in the tent? The skull alone is enough to be mitame Tumas Oil. But if that skull is missing somewhat, well, then it's deficient, and it won't be mitame Tumas Oil. There's a machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about how deficient is deficient. Beis Shammai says that if it's missing the size of a drilled hole, so then it's deficient and it won't be mitame ba'oil. Beis Hillel says if it's missing enough that a person will be unable to live with that much of his skull missing. Now the Gemara says Masechta Bechoros a whole lot of things. Among the whole lot of things that the Gemara says is that size, right? What's the size of that? If that much is missing, a person cannot live. The Gemara there says that size is the size of a sela. So therefore, if you have a skull in a tent, and that skull is missing, has a hole in it, the size of a sela, then the skull is deficient, there's no tumas oil. And of course, we saw the shita of Shmuel, that v'chein l'treifis. And that applies as well to a treifa, i.e., if an animal has a hole in its skull the size of a sela, it's treif. And we're saying, until then, it's kosher, right? You have an animal, it's got a skull, great, it's kosher. And if it gets a hole, it's still kosher, until that hole is the size of a sela. And we're saying the same thing here. Once it's the size of a sela, it's like it's even larger than a sela, i.e. ad velo, ad bichlal. So when we're talking about holes in the skull, we're saying up to, but not including a sela is kosher. And when we're talking about a hole in the trachea, we're talking about up to, but not including the size of a isar. Okay? And therefore we're saying, so it sounds like Rav Nachman holds that in terms of the question of ad va'ad bichlal or ad velo ad bichlal, we say ad velo ad bichlal. Of course, ad va'ad bichlal is a discussion that we learned already in the fourth parak of Masechta Brachos. Is the first time that we saw ad va'ad bichlal together, right? Of course, just to, right, ad va'ad bichlal means up to and including. Ad velo ad bichlal means up to and excluding, right? Up to and not including. So let's say from here that Rav Nachman Shita is ad velo ad bichlal, and now we are going to ask all sorts of questions from all sorts of places, notably two Mishnayos in Masechta Kelim. I'm going to take a shluck of coffee, of tea. I'm looking forward. Finally, I'm going to get a haircut, and I'll be able to drink tea again like a normal way, or really anything. Okay, yeah, it's like hard to eat anything for like the past month. So hopefully eventually I'll get a haircut and a beard trim. All right, where are we? So it's good for the diet, theoretically. Because you got to think twice about eating something. It's so complicated. Rav Nachman says, Rav Nachman, Kisela kiyasar mikisela. So I'm reading that again. So when we say that a skull is kosher until there is a hole the size of a sela, it is up to and not including the size of a sela. Kisar kiyasar mikisar. And when we say that a animal is kosher until there is a hole in the trachea the size of a isar, it's kosher up to an isar, but not including an isar. Isar is already too big. Almok, so Rav Nachman, so we see that Rav Nachman holds ad velo, ad bichlal, that Rav Nachman holds ad velo, ad bichlal in the ad bichlal, ad velo, ad bichlal debate. Eisvei Rava the Rav Nachman, but Rava asked a kasha and Rav Nachman from a Mishnah in Masechta Kelim. I am learning Masechta Kelim, but this Mishnah is in Perek 19, in Perek Yud Tes of Masechta Kelim. I am in Perek Yud Beis of Masechta Kelim, so I'm not quite there yet. The Mishnah in Perek Yud Tes of Masechta Kelim reads, Chevel hayoytze min hamita ad chamisha tvachim tahor. Okay, let's look at what their beds look like. Here is a photo of a Mishnaic bed. So you see like essentially a bed frame, and then there was like ropes. They would tie ropes, shasiva erev, right? Lengthwise and widthwise. Now, if you notice at the right side of the photo, there is a rope hanging off of the bed. So basically, so here's the thing: a rope in and of itself is not a kli. A rope in and of itself is not going to be makabel tumah. However, once you make it part of the bed, it will be makabel tumah as part of the bed. But what if, like you see at the end, on the right side, there's some extra rope? You got some extra rope. Well, the extra rope is not needed. So rope, as we said, rope in and of itself is not a kli, it's not makabel tumah. And here we have this extra rope. The extra rope is not makabel tumah. However, there's an interesting halacha. That halacha is that before Pesach, right, of course, on the 14th of Pesach, as we know, there's the Korban Pesach. And the Korban Pesach requires watching, requires observing 4 days in advance to check for any mums. So, I imagine the point is to check for mums, or maybe it's just a separate mitzvah about checking the Pesach. I don't remember. But you have to check it for 4 days in advance. And you would tie it to your bed. So, right, I think it even said, does it even say that in the Chumash? I don't know. But you tie it to your bed for 4 days before you offer the Korban Pesach. Now, therefore, you need that rope to tie it to your bed. Now, the rope, when you're tying it to your bed, needs to be between 5 and 10 tefachim long. If it's less than that, it's too short. More than 10 tefachim is too long. You don't need more than that. You need a rope that's between 5 and 10 tefachim long. So when it comes to a rope that's dangling off of a bed, so up to 5 tefachim, and here's the up to and including, up to not including. So, okay, so back to Mishnah Masechta Kelim. So here we go. We have Mishnah Masechta Kelim. We have this bed. The bed has the ropes tied, lengthwise, widthwise. There's some extra slack from the rope that's hanging off the bed. The question is that rope going to be makabel tumah or not? Well, up to 5, if the rope is up to 5 tefachim, so it's not makabel tumah, because what are you going to do with it? It's too short to tie the Korban Pesach to your bed. Once it's between 5 tefachim and 10 tefachim, then it is makabel tumah, because that it has a use. It's going to be used. You need it for tying the Korban Pesach to your bed. So that's between 5 and 10 tefachim. Once it's 10 tefachim, then already it's too much rope. You don't need it. And once again, it's just plain old rope. You don't. It's not going to be makabel tumah. Once it's 10 tefachim long. So again, essentially, up to 5 tefachim is not makabel tumah, and then up to 10 tefachim is makabel tumah. And the question is, does it mean up to 5 and including, up to 5 and excluding, up to 10 and including, up to 10 and excluding? So we have to understand that. Okay, so that's what we're talking about. So again, Eitzer Rava to Rav Nachman, Rava asked a kasha to Rav Nachman, when you have this extra rope that's dangling off of the bed, once the bed's already been all roped up, ad chamisha tefachim tahor. So up until 5 tefachim, the rope is tahor. Malab chamisha kilamata. So the question on Rav Nachman is, so when we're saying up until 5, does it not mean up until and including 5 is tahor? Lo. Chamisha kilamala, Rav Nachman says, no. Ad velo ad bichlal, up until and excluding, right, chamisha milamala, right, kilamala, that up until and excluding 5 is already, once it hits 5 tefachim, it's already tameh. It's no longer Torah. Tashma mehei ba'ad asara tameh. Okay, but then the Mishnah continues and says, from 5 until 10 is tameh. Ma'alav asara kilamata. So are we not saying that up until and including 10 is tameh? Lo, no. Asara kilamaila, no, up until and excluding 10. Once it's 10, it's already tahor again. Okay, fine. That was the first Mishnah from Masechta Kelim, where we were trying to make proofs about ad bichlal, ad velo ad bichlal. Rav Nachman deflected the challenges. Toshma, come here. Hadakin shebekli cheres. This is a Mishnah from the second chapter of Masechta Kelim, Perek Beis. Perek Beis, Mishnah Beis. Now, this Mishnah is talking about klei cheres. For the first 10 chapters of Masechta Kelim, it talks about klei cheres. Masechta Kelim, maybe I've mentioned this, Masechta Kelim is 30 prakim long. There are those who refer, right, just like Nizikin, right, Masechta Nizikin is 30 chapters long and it's broken into 3 Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, Bava Basra. There are those who do the same thing for Masechta Kelim. It's 30 prakim long and they're divided into Bava Kama, Bava Metzia, and Bava Basra for Masechta Kelim as well. The first 10 prakim that talk about klei cheres is a reference to is what they would call the Bava Kama, the first gate of Masechta Kelim. Akoponim, Masechta Kelim is a bit of a tricky Masechta. It's very, very technical. You need you're basically looking at picture books a lot, which is where this photo of the bed came from, my Masechta Kelim picture book. Some guy hand drew all the Mishnayos of Masechta Kelim. It's pretty cool. Anyways, so if you have a kli cheres, if you have an earthenware vessel, and that earthenware vessel is tameh, then if that earthenware vessel breaks, if it's a broken vessel, well then it becomes tahor. If it's broken, right, kli cheres you tots, you got to break it. Once it's broken, then it is tahor. It's no longer tameh. The shaila is, what if let's say you have a vase. Let's say you have a earthenware vase. And I'm imagining an earthenware vase that is like, it's kind of round. You know, it's got like some body to it. Why is that important? Because what happens if this earthenware vase breaks into 2 pieces? Whatever, it breaks. I don't know how many pieces. But there is still a piece. There is a piece that still has a base kibul, right? It still is able to. And when it broke, it didn't break into a million tiny little pieces that are completely useless, right? If there is still a piece that is usable, well, then that piece will still be tameh. We're gonna have to define how big it needs to be and stuff. But basically, the point is, if you have a kli cheres that's tameh and it breaks, and there's a piece that is still significant enough, we're going to define how significant it is, which is how we're going to get up to this size, up to that size, then it retains its tumah. Okay. So says the Mishnah Masechta Kelim, Hadakin Shebel Klei Cheres, when we're talking about small Klei Cheres, earthenware vessels, Hain, so whether we're talking about the earthenware vessel itself, the Karkarosein, Vidafnosein, Yoshvin Shalo Misumachin, Shiuran Bichdei Sichas Koin. So if you have an earthenware vessel, a small earthenware vessel, we're going to talk in a minute about how small, but if you have a small earthenware vessel and it breaks, right? So hain, whether let's not focus on hain for now. We could focus on hain in a second, but really, what the thing that we're focusing on is the next thing. V'karkaro say, basically, so let's say you have this vase, an earthenware vase, and it breaks in 2, and there's the base is still intact, or maybe even breaks into a million pieces. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But the point is that the base is still intact, and the base you can still hold some liquids in there. We'll talk about how much in a second. Or alternatively, v'dafnosein yoshin shlo mesumachin. So I mentioned an earthenware vessel that's, let's say, like round, because what if it, let's say, splits in half, and then you could put it on its side, right? Daf saying its side, you can kind of put it on its side, and because it's round, you could still like put stuff in it. It's still usable. So if either the bottom, the base of it remains intact and it's usable, or the side, like a shard from the side remains with enough shape that it's also still usable, you could just put it on its side, it'll stand, as long as it could stand without needing to be supported. So that would be considered significant enough that it would retain its tumah. Now, what does it have to be able to contain? Shi'urin bichdei sichas ka'in. As long as it can just hold a little bit of oil, a little bit of baby oil, just a little bit of oil that you can use to anoint the little finger of a baby, that piece of the vessel will retain its tumah. So whether you have a vessel that, whether the vessel itself is like, you have a vessel to begin with that is able to contain enough baby oil for to put on a baby's finger. So then that vessel, if it becomes tummy, would retain its tumah. Alternatively, if you have a larger vessel that breaks, but one of the pieces is able to simply hold enough oil to be able to anoint the finger of a baby, whether we're talking about the base of the vessel, whether we're talking about putting the vessel on its side and being able to use it to store oil in it that way, this vessel will retain its tumah. Okay, fine. That's like the main concept here, although truth is it doesn't necessarily get that much easier. But okay, so that's the concept. Now we're going to talk about different sizes. The ad and until Bichlal, until log. Now this minimum amount, this tiny little amount, that if it can even just hold a little bit of oil for a baby, that becomes the amount to retain its tumah, ad log. Until the size of the original vessel before it was broken is that of a log. A log is 6 eggs. So for small vessels that can hold up to a log of liquid, let's say, for small vessels that can hold up to a log, if they break, and in the shards, in any of the shards, there's enough to even just hold a little bit of oil for a baby, that shard will retain its tumah. So my lab, log kilamatos, let's say up to and including a log. So even if you have a vessel that's exactly a log, and it breaks, we're still going to have the more stringent shear of even just enough for a baby, it would retain its tumah. Log kilamayla. No, Rav Nachman would say up to, but not including a log. A log would already be in the bumped up a shear. Now the bumped up shear, as we're going to see right now in a second, is from a log until a sa'ah, right? There are 4 logs in a kav, 6 kavs in a sa'ah. So a sa'ah is 24 logs. So we said up until the size of a log, if it breaks, if any of the shards can hold a little bit of baby oil, it would still retain its tumah. Now, the next category would be from a log until a sa'ah. Between a log and a sa'ah, if this larger vessel breaks, if there is a shard that can retain, right, at this point, since it's a bigger vessel, just being able to hold enough oil for a baby, a baby is not enough. It needs to be, the shard is going to have to be bigger for it to retain its tumah. If there's a shard that remains that can hold enough liquid, could hold a revius halog, so then that shard would retain its tumah. So that's kind of the next category. So when we said up until a log, and we said no, a log is like more than a log, is the next category. So that next category is from a log to a sa'ah, and if that vessel breaks, if any of the pieces having it are large enough to be able to hold a revius, a quarter of a log, then it would retain its tumah. So now, Toshma, come in here. Milog ad sa'ah, so from one log until a sa'ah, b'revius. If there is a shard that remains that can hold a revius, that shard will retain its tumah. My love, so when we say ad sa'a, until a sa'a kilamata, up to and including a sa'a, the shard would be tamei if it could hold the revius. Lo, some kilamala, no. Up to and excluding a sa'a, once it's a sa'a, it's bumped up to the next bracket. Okay, Tashma, coming here. Misabat sa'a saim. Okay, the next bracket is from 1 sa'a to 2 sa'as. So in that case, bachatzilog. Between 1 sa'a and 2 sa'as, if it breaks, then for a shard to retain its tumah, it would have to be able to hold half of a log to retain its tumah. My love, sa'a saim kilamata. So we say up until 2 sa'a, up to and including 2 sa'a. Lo, sa'a saim kilamata. No, up to and excluding 2 sa'a, that would be bumped up to the next bracket. And that next bracket would essentially be, we just did half a log, so a whole log. Okay, fine. V'atanya, but fragdigim, okay, where are we right now? This has been a little bit technical, but where are we? Basically, we have Rav Nachman, who says, ad velo ad bichlal, and we keep on asking questions from other scenarios where we're saying up until, whether we're talking about the rope of the bed up until 5, up until 10, or whether we're talking about these vessels up until a log, up until a saw, up until 2 saw. We keep on trying to say, doesn't it mean up until and including? Rav Nachman keeps on saying, no, it means up until and excluding. Now, but here comes this very important question. Ve'atanya, but here's the problem. We have a brisa, and that brisa says, log kilimata, that when we say up to a log, it means up to and including a log. It means up to and including a log. If it breaks, then the minimum size of the shard to retain its tumah is going to be just enough for a baby, right, to anoint a baby. Sa'a kilamata, and when we say up until a sa'a, it means up until and including a sa'a. This is a brisa right here, we're saying this. Sa'a sa'im kilamata, and when we say up until 2 sa'a, it means up until and including 2 sa'a. So Rav Nachman can't simply deflect the questions from that Mishnah about the log, the saw, saim, and say no, it means up to and excluding. We have a brisa saying up to and including. So the Gemara gives an amazing answer. So the Gemara says hasam lichumra. He says, up to and including, because up to and including is being machmir in that particular case. The Amr Babble, Amr Yechanan, Kol Shi'urei Chachamim Lehachmir. We're not done with that phrase yet, but we're going to stop there because otherwise it opens up a new branch to it, and let's focus on the branch that we already have. That says, Rabbi Babble, the name of Rabbi Yechanan, that all Shi'urim of the Chachamim, we have to be machmir. And therefore, we kind of, I think we have enough basically to wrap up the sugya. There's still some more, but we basically have all that we need to understand the sugya. That we just said, Kol shi'urei chacham lahachmir. That whenever we have the shi'urim, the amounts, the measurements of the sages, we have to be stringent. And therefore, there's no fixed rule about we always say ad v'ad bichlal, or we always say ad v'lo ad bichlal. No, it doesn't work like that. We always say, when it comes to measurements, whatever is more stringent. And therefore, when it came to these vessels that break, and there are shards, and the shards can still hold something, so those shards retain its tumah, so it's obviously going to be more machmir to say that even smaller shards retain tumah. Even a shard so small that all it can contain is a little bit of oil for a little baby, that's the stringency. And therefore to say, ad v'ad bichlal, to say up to and including a log, it means that even once you get up to the size of a log, it's not bumped up in the next category. It's still the same category, and if it breaks and there's a shard that can even hold that little amount, it's still going to retain its tumah. The same thing for the saw, the same thing for the saim, that by saying ad v'ad bichlal, you're keeping it in the lower bracket, which means that there's a lower threshold for defining what remains tameh. And that's why we say ad v'ad bichlal there. When it comes to the rope, we'll get back. There's an interesting thing with the rope that we're going to get to in a minute. Let's take it back to our Mishnah. Therefore, when Rav Nachman says that when there's a hole in the trachea, it's kosher, and it continues to be kosher up until the size of an isar, the size of a coin, up until and excluding. Until the size of an isar, it's kosher. Once it's the size of an isar, it's already like it's bigger than an isar. It's already treif. Up to and not including. Not velo ad bichlal, because that is the more stringent case. The same thing for the hole in the skull. Up to and excluding the size of a sela. Once it's a sela, it's already treif. So basically the idea is there's no fixed rule about we always say ad va'ad bichlal or we always say ad velo ad bichlal. When it comes to measurements, we just have to do whatever is more stringent. Chutz, there's one exception, says Rabbi Bodanim, Rabbi Yochanan, mikigris shel ksamim lahakol. There is an exception, and that is a gris of ksamim. What's that talking about? There is a Mishnah in Masechta Nida. I remember learning this Mishnah. I was in Bali. I remember learning this Mishnah. I remember learning this concept of that whenever it comes to ad bichlal and ad velo ad bichlal, we always do whatever is more stringent. I remember I was in Chengu. I was renting a villa, and there was an upstairs room, and in the morning I was learning in the upstairs room, and I saw this klal that whenever there's ad bichlal, ad velo ad bichlal, we always do this more stringent. And I said, "Wow, that's amazing," and I underlined it. Can you imagine? That was before Babble on Talmud. Nida is the last Masechta in Shas, right before Shas starts over. That's when I was doing practice shiurim and stuff. That's when I was learning, getting in the hang of doing Babble on Talmud. That was even before Babble on Talmud. I already learned that. I was like, that's when I was getting in my flow of underlining the stuff I wanted to remember. Now, Mamish, I have almost a whole Shas that's underlined. It's awesome. Akupanim. So, what were we saying? What were we saying? Nida. So the Mishnah Masechta Nida that says that if a woman finds a blood stain on her clothing, and she doesn't know that it's dam nida, she just sees a blood stain on her clothing, and so the shaila is, does she have to assume that it's dam nida and that she's a nida or not? So if there's any kind of thing that she can attribute it to that's not dam nida, that works. If she was shechting a chicken, and it could be from the chicken, great. If somebody in her house was shechting a chicken or a sheep or a goat, whatever, what are some of the other examples in the Mishnah? I can't remember. Maybe she got a cut or something. Whatever it could be. If there's some kind of thing that she could attribute it to it, that would not be dam nida, so then she can attribute it to it. Now, one of the examples there is if she crushed the louse. If there was a louse and she crushed a louse, and now she sees that there is dam on her garment, there's blood on her garment, so she can attribute it to having crushed the louse. And the question is, well, how much? Sure, she crushed the louse, but what if there's a ton of blood on her clothing? That's not from a louse. So we say up until how large could that dam be to attribute it to the louse? Up to a gris. A gris is half of the size of a bean. So up to that amount. And we say there that up to and including that amount. I.e., even if it's the size of a gris, you can still assume that it is from the louse. We don't have to assume that it is dam nida. So in that case, we are lenient, and that's because that's really only midar abanon. Midar oraisa, it would be dam nida if she was aware that it was coming from her body. But in this case, where it's a suffix, so it's only midar abanon. So if she just finds a dam on her clothing, it would be midar abanon. So there we'll be lenient and we'll say that she can assume it's from the louse. Okay. Daikanami, and we can also infer that this mahalach is correct, that when it comes to ad bichlal and ad velo ad bichlal, by shiurim we just go with whatever is more stringent. Dekatone alo de'ahi, that when it comes to that first Mishnah from Masechta Kelim with the bed and the rope, chamisha kilemayla asara kilemata, that even within that one Mishnah, which talked about up to 5 and up to 10, we mix and match based on whatever is more stringent. Then when we say that up to 5 is tahor, well, we say 5 itself is tameh. And when we say that, right, meaning, right, so it's ad velo ad bichlal. 5 itself is not tahor, it's tameh. And when we say up to 10 is tameh, there we say ad ve'ad bichlal, right? The first one was ad ve'lo ad bichlal. Then we say up to 10 is tameh, that's ad ve'ad bichlal, including 10. 10 is also tameh, and then above 10 becomes tahor again. So even within that same Mishnah, we had first ad ve'lo ad bichlal, and then we had ad ve'ad bichlal in order to include both 5 and exactly 5 and exactly 10 in the tameh range. So we see that when it comes to ad ve'ad bichlal, ad ve'lo ad bichlal, we're always going to go with whatever is more stringent, and we see that even within one Mishnah, we could say both ad ve'ad bichlal and ad ve'lo ad bichlal based on whichever is more stringent. Okay, Givaldi. And with that we wrap up the very, I think, interesting discussion of ad ve'ad bichlal versus ad ve'lo ad bichlal. And now we get up to the next section of the Mishnah, nital atchol. If the spleen has been removed from the animal is kosher. Amar of Avira, Mishmei Derovit, says of Avira in the name of Rabbi, Loshanu Ella nital. Okay, that is if the spleen is removed entirely. Aval nikab, but if it's there but punctured, treifa. Says of Avira, if it's punctured, it's treifa. Mosiv Rabbi Yossi bar Oven, Mitem Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida, Chotech meuber sheb me'el muter ba'achila. Minatchol u'minaklayos also ba'achila. Habe magufa shari. Very, very interesting question. This comes from the first Mishnah in the next parak. The first Mishnah in the next parak. We have about another almost 2 weeks until then. The first Mishnah in the next parak behema mikasha leilid. So if you have a animal, we've seen this, I think, I don't know if we saw this specifically, this part of the Mishnah, but this has come up in the past, behema mikasha leilid, that if you have a animal, a sheep or whatever, that is struggling to give birth, so you say, all right, you know what, let's just eat this sheep. Now, before they shecht the sheep, somebody stuck their hand into the sheep and cut off the arm of the fetus. Right there, it's a pregnant baby. They cut off the arm of the fetus. So the shaila is, right, is it Eivra min Achai? Right? You can't just like go to an animal and cut off its arm and eat it. So in this case, a person stuck their hand inside the animal, cut off the fetus's arm, but everything remained in the animal. You know, the halacha is even before cutting off the arm, the halacha is if you shecht a mother and there's a baby inside, so you can eat the mother, you can eat the baby. You don't need to shecht the baby, even if the baby is alive inside the mother. You don't need to shecht the baby. You shechted the mother, that works for the baby as well. Now, in this case, a person stuck their hand into the mother, cut off the arm of the baby. So now inside the mother, there is a fetus, minus an arm, and an arm. When you shecht the mother, you can eat the fetus, you can eat the arm, you can eat both of them based on the shrita of the mother. Now, so we see that basically, so what's inside the mother, you can eat. What's inside the mother, you can eat. You can eat the fetus, you can eat the arm. What if you did something slightly different? Instead of cutting up the fetus inside the mother, what if you cut a piece of the spleen or of the kidney of the mother? Not the fetus of the mother, but an organ of the mother. You did some kind of a surgery and you cut the kidney or you cut the spleen and you left the kidney and the spleen inside, just like you left the arm of the fetus inside, and then you shech the mother and you can eat the arm and the fetus. What would happen if you cut the kidney or the spleen of the mother and leave the kidney and the spleen inside the mother and shech the mother? Can you eat the kidney and the spleen? That's what we're talking about. So let's start from the beginning. Amar Avira Mishmei Deravis is Avira in the name of Rav Loshanu Elanital Aval Nikev Treifa. Fine. If you says Rav Avira that if you puncture the spleen, even though if you remove it entirely, it's kosher, but if you puncture the spleen, it's treifa. Mosiv Rabbi Yossi bar Oven B'Tem Rabbi Yossi bar Zvida, says the Mishnah at the beginning of the next parak of Masechet Chullin, Chotech meuber sheb me'el, if you cut off, if somebody sticks their hand into the mother and cuts off the arm of the fetus, and then shechs the mother, but everything is still inside the mother, the fetus, the hand, the arm. Mutter ba'achila, you can eat the fetus and you can eat the arm. Minatchol u'minakloyis, but if somebody went and cut the spleen, cut a piece from the spleen of the mother or from the kidney of the mother and left that piece inside the mother, osur b'achila, you're not allowed to eat that piece of the kidney or of the spleen. It would be Ever Minachai. Ha-behema gufa sharia. But the animal, the rest of the animal, okay, so you can't eat that piece of the spleen or of the kidney, but you can eat the rest of the animal. So what's the question? The question is, Rabbi Avira is saying that if you puncture the spleen, it's treif. But here we're saying that you went in, not only did you puncture the spleen, you cut a piece from the spleen. That's more than puncturing. And we're saying, okay, you can't eat that piece, but when you shech the mother, you can eat the rest. Just don't eat that piece, because you eat the rest of the animal. But if it's treif, you can't eat it if it's treif. According to Rabbi Avira, puncturing makes it treif. Certainly cutting off a piece would make it treif. How can you eat it? So, and for the Gemara, hu adin tafilu be'manami asira. So answers the Gemara, no, the truth is that in this case, if somebody goes in and cuts the spleen while the mother is alive, it would be a treifa. It would, just like puncturing, this would also be a treifa. And you would not be allowed to eat the rest of the animal. Just like you would not be allowed to eat the spleen, that piece of the spleen or the kidney, you can't eat the rest of the animal either. It's treif. I did the Tana Reisha mutar ba'achila, and since the Reisha was talking about mutar ba'achila by the fetus, when you cut the arm from the fetus, and we're saying that the fetus and the arm you are allowed to eat. So Tananami Seifa also ba'achila. So also the Seifa says that the piece of the kidney or the piece of the spleen that you cut is also asur b'achila, but it's not to say that the rest of the animal is mutar b'achila. The fact of the matter is that the rest of the animal is also asur b'achila, just that for consistency, since the first part of the Mishnah was talking about basically what was being cut, the fetus, the arm, so also the Seifa was written from the perspective of the kidney, of the spleen, but the fact of the matter is it would be a treifa and the rest of the animal is also asur v'baisema. Alternatively, you know what? The rest of the animal is mutter because it's not a treifa. V'baisema nikev l'chud v'nechtach l'chud. There's a difference between puncturing and cutting. Puncturing would make the animal treif, but cutting a piece, you wouldn't be allowed to eat that piece because it's Ever Minachai, but the rest of the animal would not be a treifa. I think Rashi doesn't say anything here. I think there was a note in the art school that says because I guess puncturing may be more painful, I guess, than removing a piece which is just gone. I don't know. Okay. Fine. Okay, so we had the sheet of Rav Avira who says that if you puncture, right, so if you remove the spleen, fine, but if you puncture it, then it is treif. And then we asked the question based on the Mishnah Behema Makasha Leiled, that if you remove a piece from the kidney or the spleen, you can't eat it, but the implication was that you can eat the rest of the animal. We said either you can't eat the rest of the animal or you could, because removing a piece is different than puncturing. Okay, fine. And now we move on to the next section of the Mishnah, Nitlu Akloyis, if the kidneys were removed. Amarachish bar Popet, Mishmei Derab, Laksa b'chuya achas. So the Mishnah said if the kidneys are removed, the animal is kosher, which is an interesting question because I think that we assume that animals can't live without kidneys. But anyways, Amarachish bar Popet, Mishmei Derab, Laksa b'chuya achas treifa. If it has both kidneys, but one of them gets diseased, treif. My Rava, they say in Eretz Yisrael, v'hu d'matoi lakusa l'makom charetz. That is, if the disease gets into the etched out part. Ve'chamakom charetz, where's the etched out part? L'chivra detuse masne, the white part that's under the loins. Let's look at what a kidney looks like. These are kidneys. The photo on the left is cow kidneys. The photo on the right is goat and sheep kidneys. Notice how they look very different. The ones on the right, the goat and sheep kidneys, literally look like kidney beans. The ones on the left, I don't know what they look like. Anyways, so that white stuff is what we're talking about. right? Whether it's the photo on the left, whether it's photo on the right, it's different for the cows and for the behema gasa, cows, behema daka, goat and sheep. So behema gasa on the left and behema daka on the right, it's different. For the behema gasa, there is, it's kind of, you see it like kind of looking at it. Whereas by the behema daka on the right, you have to like cut open the kidney to kind of see the white stuff. Anyways, if that white stuff gets all diseased, it's treif. I asked all of the treifa experts in Eretz Yisrael, Vamrli, and they said to me, Hilchasa, the halacha is, drum roll please, ki rachish bar papa, that the halacha is like rachish bar papa, that if the kidney gets diseased, the animal is treif. V'leis halacha kabavira, but the halacha is not like Rabbi Avira, that if the spleen is punctured, Rabbi Avira said it's treif, it's not. However, to Rabbi Avira nami lo amarin ella, or v'lo amarin ella bekulshe, aval besumche treifa. However, when we say that, it's not totally true. Rabbi Avira had said, if the spleen gets punctured, the animal's treifa. It's not a blanket rule. It's sometimes true, it's sometimes not. When's it true? In the thick part of the spleen. When's it untrue? In the thin part of the spleen. If there's a puncture in the thin part of the spleen, the animal is kosher. If there's a puncture in the thick part of the spleen, the animal is treif. Let's quickly take a look at a spleen. This is a spleen. The pink arrow is pointing to the thicker part of the spleen, and the yellow arrow is pointing to the thinner part of the spleen. There are different thicknesses in the spleen. The spleen, is whatever. It's attached to the diaphragm as well as the keres on the thicker part. The thinner part just kind of isn't attached to anything. Anyways, so if the puncture is in the thinner part of the spleen, so then it's kosher. If it's in the thicker part of the spleen, it's treif. V'ishtir be ka'ovi dinar zav chair. Now, even in the thicker part of the spleen, if it goes all the way through the thicker part of the spleen, so it's treif. But if it only goes somewhat through and enough remains that has not been punctured, that it's a thickness of an isser? A dinar zav, a golden dinar, then it's kshera. I think the Shulchan Aruch says that since we don't actually know how much this is, so basically the rule of thumb is a halfway. If it's less than halfway punctured, it's kshera. More than halfway punctured through the thick part, it is treif. Amid Marova, they say in Eretz Yisrael, kol aposel bereya, anything that is possible by a lung, for example, a puncture, kosher bechulya is kosher by a kidney. Sharei nekeb possible bereya, that a puncture is possible by a lung, the kosher bechulya, but a puncture is kosher by a kidney. Now the Gemara wants to say, it's about to reject him, the Gemara wants to say, and certainly, right, if lungs are more stringent than kidneys, a puncture in a lung is treif, a puncture in a kidney is kosher, well then certainly that which is kosher by lungs are going to be kosher by kidneys. I hope I said that right. Right? A puncture by a lung is treif, a puncture by a kidney is kosher. Lungs are more stringent than kidneys. Therefore, if a lung, which is more stringent, in a scenario where it's kosher, certainly a kidney will be kosher then as well. Maskiv la Rab Tanchuma asked a question, but is this really true, the whole kosher thing? Very mugla. Mugla is a great word that we discovered in Masechta Chullin. Mugla means pus. Pus is a pretty good word for pus. Mugla is a better one. Very mugla, the kosher bereya, if a lung has mugla in it, as long as it hasn't punctured the membranes, it is kosher. Ufasel b'chulya, but mugla in a kidney is pasul. Very mayim zakim, the ksherim achav acha. Rashi says he's not exactly sure what this has to do with anything. That clear water is kosher both by a kidney and by the lungs. Okay. El Amar Rabashi says, Rabashi, treifis kamadamis la'adadi, says Rabashi, what? Are you really trying to reason about treifis, to say that, lungs are more stringent as a rule than kidneys. You can't reason about and compare and contrast different types of trephis. Ein omrim b'trefis zo doma lezo. We don't say that, oh yeah, this is like that when it comes to trephis. Each treifa is unique. Sharei chotcha mikan v'mesa chotcha mikan v'chayev. For example, you can cut it in its neck and it dies, or you can cut it even by its somes hagidin and it'll die, but you can cut it in its shoulder closer to the heart and it won't die. So, okay, each treifa is unique. Fine. Umayim zakim ksherim. When we say that clear water in a kidney is kosher, maybe this also applies this might also apply to the lung as well, though I think I saw in the Rambam Dafka in the context of the kidney. Lo amar and ella ditzile. That's if these waters are clear. Aval achire treifa. But if they're not clear water, they're like murky water, so then treif. V'chitzile nami, and even if they're clear, lo amar and ella de lo suriach, as long as they don't smell petrid. Aval sariach, they smell petrid, treifa. Petrid smelling kidneys are treifa. Well, petrid water in these kidneys are treifa. Akulia she'iktina bidaka ad kiful bigasa ad ke'anova benonis. This is actually interesting because the article translates it into English in a way that's difficult to understand, but looking it up in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Rambam, I don't know. I'm a little confused because like the article said one thing, but like my gut is telling me it's another thing. So I'm going to go with my gut here. I'm going to go with my kidney here. After all, it says akleos yoatzos. Why do we go with our gut? We should go with our kidney. Friends, what do you think about that? I'm just going to go with my kidney here. That probably makes more sense. Akleos yoatzos, they say. The kidneys give advice. I'm just going to go with my kidney here. That akuya shektina. So if you have a kidney that shrunk, that shriveled, bidaka. So if we're talking about a goat, a sheep, ad kiful, and it's so small that now it is the size of a bean or less. Bigasa, and by be'emagasa ad ka'anova benonis, until a mid-sized grape. If it's that size or smaller, it is treif. It's starting to become grape season here in Eretz Yisrael. I'm probably going to start buying some grapes. The grapes in Eretz Yisrael cost an arm and a leg, but they're kind of worth it. The grapes are mind-blowingly good. I haven't gotten grapes yet this season. It started the fruits are starting to get good. My mom's coming next week. Yeah, but now I get nervous because I always hype up the fruits of Eretz Yisrael, and then it was strawberry season when my mom came. Usually my mom comes when it's like in between seasons because, like Sukkot, Pesach, it's always in between seasons. Summer, the winter, in between the Chagim, that's the peak seasons. So the watermelons are getting quite good. The melons are getting quite good. I haven't gotten mangoes yet. I'm waiting. They're like starting to get good, I think. The grapes, I think, are starting to get good. Cherries are really good. Yeah, some great stuff here in Eretz Yisrael right now. All right, skip the parentheses. So we skip the next two lines or so. Nitla aim shela. If the womb is missing, Tana he aim he tarpachas he shalfuchis. The aim, the tarpachas, and the shalfuchis are all synonymous. They're all the womb. V'charusa b'dei shamayim kshera. And the Mishnah had said that if an animal's lungs were withered, but they were withered because they got frightened, bidei shamayim, like from thunder or lightning. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis thought, Eizu charusa, what does withered mean? Kol shetzamka reya shela bidei shamayim kshera. So what's it? So kol shetzamka reya shela, if its lung got withered, bidei shamayim kshera, if it got withered from God, from thunder or lightning, kshera. Bidei adam, treif, by man, treif, right? If somebody says boo, and then its lungs get all shriveled up, treif. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer says, Reb Shimon ben Elazar cryptically, af bidei kol habrios, even by any of the other animals like a lion or something. Yabayu, they ask, what does Reb Shimon ben Elazar mean? Reb Shimon ben Elazar, areisha kayu lekula, is he saying that also scared by a lion is like bidei shamayim and it's kosher, or aseifa kari l'chumra, or is it like bidei adam and it's puzzle? It's treif. Tashma kaminu desani we learn in the Bichlal charusa bidei adam treifa. Says the Tanakama that if a person says boo, and the animal's lungs shrivel up, treif. Rav Shimon ben Elazar Omer af bidei kol abrios, says Rav Shimon ben Elazar, and this is even if it's from a lion, also it would be treif. Rabbi Bachana was traveling in the desert. Ashkach hanu dichrei, and he found these rams. Did samik reya didu, and their lungs were all shriveled up. I guess they shechted them, and their lungs were all shriveled up. Also, so he came to the Beis HaMedrash to ask, "Nu, are these kosher or treif?" Amrullah, they said to him, "This is what you do. Bekaita, in the summer, I say meshichle chivare. You take these white earthenware basins, umalinu maya krire, and fill them up with cold water. Ve'anchinu me'es le'es, and leave the shriveled lungs in there for 24 hours. Ihadron baryon bidei shamayim vikshera. If they get rehydrated, so then it's bidei shamayim and they're kosher. The ilo, but if they do not rehydrate, treifa. Besitzva, in the winter, I say meshichle shichume, bring black earthenware basins, umalinu maya pshure, and fill them with lukewarm water, with room temperature water, v'anchinu me'es leis, and leave the shriveled lungs in there for 24 hours, ihadra barya kshera, the ilo treifa. If they rejuvenate, so then they are kshera. If not, they are treifa. And now for the final section of our Mishnah, gluta. When the animal is skinless. Gluta, a skinless animal. Reb Meir machshir. Reb Meir says kosher. Chacham posen, Chacham say treif. Uchvaheid Elazar Safra v'Yochanan ben Gudgada ala gluta shepsula. And Elazar Safra and Yochanan ben Gudgada testified that gluta is psula like the Chachamim. Rav Shimon ben Elazar, Chazer bo Reb Meir, says Rav Shimon ben Elazar that Reb Meir retracted his opinion of kosher to say like the rabbis, treif. Michladu Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Polig Reb Meir, begluta. But 1 second, does that imply, right, from the fact that Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that Reb Meir retracted, that implies that at some point he argued. But Vatani, we learned about Reb Shimon ben Elazar, says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, Lo nechliku Reb Meir b'chacham ala gluda shel psula. That Reb Meir, that says Reb Shimon ben Elazar, there's no machlokes between Reb Meir and the chacham with regard to gluda, that it's psula. So on the one hand, Reb Shimon ben Elazar is saying that Reb Meir retracted to the chacham. On the other hand, he says that there's no machlokes b'chlal. So what's there to retract from? Hufahed Reb Ushaya b'nosh Reb Yehuda Abbasam, the Reb Ushaya, the son of Reb Yehuda, the potion guy, the fragrance guy, Lifnei Reb Akiva, before Reb Akiva, Mishum Reb Tarfon, in the name of Reb Tarfon, ala gluta shepsula, that an animal that's missing its skin is psula, v'im neshtayir bo kisela, but if there is a sela's worth of remaining skin, it's ksher because it will grow back, it will rejuvenate. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, in terms of Reb Shimon ben Elazar, and is there a machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chacham or not? Milo nechliku. What does it mean when Reb Shimon ben Elazar says that there's no machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim? It means Amad Reb Meir b'machlukaso. It means lo Amad Reb Meir b'machlukaso. It means when it says lo nechliku, it means not that there never was a machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim, but rather there was a machlokes, but Reb Meir did not retain his dissenting position. Rather, did not retain his dissenting position. Rather, he conceded to hold like the Chacham. Omar, we said earlier, im neshtarbo kisela kshera, that if skin the size of a sela remains, the animal is not treif, it's kosher. Where is this skin? Amar Vidu Amar Shmuel, al pnei ashedra kula, a sela's worth on the spine. By the way, they asked the question, De'arich v'ka'in? What does it mean, a sela's worth on the spine? Like a total area of a sela? Like even if it's really long, like a really long and thin strip of skin? That if you were to roll all of the skin that remain in this long, thin strip that goes across the spine, goes the length of the spine, and you kind of roll it up, it would be the size of a sela? Is that what it means? Or perhaps berochav sela apnei ashedra kula, or maybe it means the width of a sela throughout the spine, not a really long, thin strip of skin, but a strip of skin that is the width of a sela throughout the spine. What is it? Tashma Kamanir, de Parshab Norai Mishmei de Shmuel, Birochav Sela Alpne Kol Ashedra Kula, a skin that is a width of a sela along the entirety of the spine. Rab Babachana, Marsa's Rab Babachana, Rashe Prakim, that there needs to be a sela's worth of skin on the joints. So that's on like all of the vertebrae and on the different joints of the legs. Rabbalazar ben Antigonos Mishum Rabbalazar Breb Yane Omer Makum Tibure Ba'i Makum Tiburo. This is also been a Tignas in the same Rabbalazar ben Yane by his pupik. There needs to be a sela's worth of skin by the pupik, by the belly button. By Rab Yanai, Rab Yishmael asked, Nital Makom Ashedra V'chula, what Nital Makom Ashedra V'chulo Kaim? What about if things get reversed? There's no skin on the spine, but there is skin on the rest of the body. Nita makom tiburo ve'chulod kaim. There's no skin on the pupik, but there is skin on the rest of the body. Nitlu roshe prokim v'chulo kaim. There's no skin on the vertebrae and the joints, but the rest of the body has skin. Mai teku, we say it's a tie. The Rambam says it's a suffix, but then he also says that he's leaning to say that it should be kosher, and I think that makes. First of all, it's interesting that the Rambam doesn't just say it's suffix, he says it's leaning to say that it's kosher, and I think that's probably because, if we're saying that if just a little bit of skin the size of a coin remains, it'll all grow back, well then, if you have all of the skin minus a little bit, alachas kama v'chama, kilu, certainly that little bit would get covered again. I don't know. Amar Rav says, Rav Kola, or kulo matzil begluta, that in terms of the gluta, when it's missing all of its skin, but it has a little bit left, that little bit can be anywhere on the body. If you have a little bit of skin anywhere on the body, it's kosher because it'll rejuvenate. Chutz me'or beis aprasos, but not an animal, its legs has basically three parts. If we take a look at the back leg, for example, there's the top section, which has the yerech, the femur. Then you have the middle section, which has the shok, which is the tibula. And then you have the bottom section, which is referred to, I think, as like the regel. So in that bottom section, that skin is considered like meat. It's not considered like skin. So basically, if you have skin, if there's skin anywhere on the body that is the size of an isar, so then it will rejuvenate but if the skin is like at the bottom, in the bottom section of the legs, then that won't work because that skin is considered like meat. It's not considered like skin. Rabbi Yochanan says, Rabbi Yochanan, afilu or beis process nami matzil. Whereas Rabbi Yochanan says, no, even the skin at the bottom section of the legs, that is fine. If there's skin there, the animal will be kosher. But Rabbi Asi asks Rabbi Yochanan, or beis haprasos ma'u sheyatzil begluta. Rabbi Asi asks Rabbi Yochanan, when you have a gluta, when you have an animal with no skin, but the skin at the bottom section of the legs remains, will the animal be kosher? Amalei matzil. Rabbi Yochanan says, as he said a minute ago, yes, that skin counts and it will be kosher. Omarle, however, Rabbi Asi says, Limadtenu Rabbeinu. We learn in Perek Or V'Arotem. This is a Perek that's coming, I think it's the 9th Perek of Masechta Chulin. It's coming up later on. Perek Or V'Arotem, we learned, Elu she'oroseyen kibsaran. That in these examples, their hide is like their flesh. or beis haprosos, and one of those examples is the hide of the bottom section of the leg. Okay, without going into... Okay, basically what the Mishnahs are talking about over there, it's talking about tumas nevela and tumas ochlin, and it's saying that tumas nevela and tumas... So for example, if you have a kazayis of nevela, of meat of a nevela, so then it will be, it's tummy. If, however, you had skinned the animal, that skin is not tummy. The meat is tummy, the skin is not tummy. However, if you have the skin of the bottom section of the leg, that skin is considered like meat and it is tummy. And similarly for tumas ochlin also, it would contract and pass on tumas ochlin as well. So basically the point is that in this section at the bottom of the leg, says the Mishnah in Perek Orva Rotev, that the hide is not considered like hide at the bottom section of the legs, rather like meat. And therefore, if it's not like hide, if it's like meat, then it should be unable. If you have an animal that's missing all of its hide and only has this is meat. This isn't hide. It's not going to help. So Rabbi Asi says, Rabbi Yochanan, what about that Mishnah? So Omar Le, Rabbi Yochanan says, Al takniteni, don't drive me mishiga from that Mishnah, shebeloshin yochid ani shone osa, because that Mishnah is a das yochid. That Mishnah is the opinion of Reb Shimon. It's not the opinion of the Chacham. The Chacham would say that the hide of the bottom section of the legs is considered hide. The only hide that they would say is like meat is the hide by the aliyah, the hide by the tail. The sign that we learn in the Brisa says it Tanakama, hashoichet is ha'oila, somebody who slaughters a korban ola, lahaktir kazayis, he slaughters with the intention of burning a kazayis of the animal, of the korban ola. May or shetachas aliyah, from the hide that is underneath the tail, chutz mimikomo, outside of where you're allowed to burn it, outside the azar, posel ve'embo karis. So as we know, chutz mimkomo is posel ve'embo karis. Chutz zmano, but if it's outside of its allotted time, pigo b'chayiv and olav karis, you can be chayiv karis. So we see there that the hide under the tail is considered like the meat, right? The hide of a korban ola is not burnt on the mizbeach, but the meat is burnt on the mizbeach, and this hide underneath the aliyah, underneath the tail, we're saying is shaykh to pigo because it's like the meat rather than like, it's not considered like the hide. But that's specifically the aliyah, specifically that hide. Eliezer ben Yehuda ish iblim Amr b'Shimon Reb Yaakov v'chenoi Reb Shimon ben Yehuda ish kfar ikus Amr b'Shimon Reb Shimon echad or beis haprosos, that no, this applies also to the hide of the bottom section of the legs, the echad or harosh shel egal arach, or even the hide of the head of a newborn calf, the echad or shatachas aliyah, or the hide underneath the tail, like the Tanakama had said, v'chol shemanu chacham gabe tuma elu shoresein kibsarin, and all the examples that are mentioned in the Mishnah in elu in Ha'or V'Arotev, that their hide is like their skin, lahavi or beis haboshes, and that includes also the hide of the genitalia of female animals. Chutzim komo, that if there's intention of chutzim komo, posel v'im b'karis, chutzim zmano, pigol, mechayav and olive karis. So we see that according to Reb Shimon, all of those other examples, the hide is considered like the meat. However, says Rabbi Yochanan, the Tanakama disagrees and says that distinction is only by the hide that is beneath the aliyah, that is beneath the tail. However, any other hide, including the hide of the bottom section of the feet, would be considered like hide, and therefore, if it remains on the animal, it will rejuvenate the rest of the skin, even if the rest of the skin is missing. Friends, that was Daf Nun Hey, Daf 55 of Masechta Chullin. Yeah, sheesh, I had a feeling that was going to be a big daf. I had a feeling, even though it wasn't that hard of a daf per se, but I had a feeling it was just going to be big. Anyways, we started with that ad va'ad bichlal discussion. Ad va'ad bichlal, ad v'lo ad bichlal. When we say that was very interesting. Essentially, the maskana of the Gemara was that we don't have to be consistent with it. what does have to be consistent is that when it comes to measurements, we're going to choose the one that is more stringent. So ad va'ad bichlal, or ad v'lo ad bichlal, choose the one that is more stringent in terms of measurements. For example, when a vessel or whatever, for example, by a treifa, a hole in the esophagus, when he is so up to the size of an isar, once it's an isar already, it's going to be treif. We have to be stringent. For example, we talked about when the spleen is gone, so then the animal is kosher. Rab Avya had said that even if the spleen gets punctured, however, if it's missing, it's kosher, but if it's punctured, it is treif. We had some discussions about that. Ultimately, it depends if it was punctured if it's in the thinner part of the spleen, it's kosher. If it's in the thicker part of the spleen, it's treif, but only if it's more than halfway poked. We discussed the kidneys, right? When the kidneys are gone, we say that the animal is kosher, but if they get infected, then they are not kosher. When the womb is gone, the animal is kosher. We learned about some synonyms for womb. When the lungs are shriveled up, if they're shriveled up by like thunder and lightning, kosher. By peekaboo, then they are puzzle. And if it is by like a lion or they get frightened by another animal, it is also treif. And we learned about an interesting way to test it out if you find shriveled up animal lungs in the desert, involving basins of water in the summer and the winter. And then we discussed when the skin is missing. We said ultimately that Reb Meir agrees with the Chacham that Gluta is puzzle. However, we did have different, as is treif. However, we did have different scenarios where if there's a little bit of skin remaining, it can rejuvenate itself. And friends, that was Daf Nun Hey, Daf 55 of Masechet Chullin. Hope you enjoyed. Have a great day. I'll catch you tomorrow. Cheers.